Well, good morning. I'll be reading part of the lesson and then giving a little context a moment later. But our reading comes at the end of Mark's Gospel, chapter 10, where Jesus and the disciples are having a pretty significant argument with one another. There's a disagreement among the disciples. James and John have caused problems with their friends, and Jesus is now using it as a teaching moment. Somebody's car alarm is going off. Shall we wait? I can stay. I'm here all day. There we go. Richard, thanks for turning off your alarm. No, it wasn't Richard. Thank you. So he says, whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be a slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for the many.
We're all going to have mistakes. We're all going to mess up. We're all going to do these crazy things in life. But having someone that believes in you and knows that you're good and can see the happiness and the purity in you, then it's all golden, man. It makes the world a better place.
Village of Tulsa is a 63 tiny home community. Those individuals will be able to kind of get to know those neighbors in their cul-de-sac. And so really this whole project is for helping Tulsa with the homeless issue. These are chronically unhoused individuals. They've been out on the streets for at least 12 consecutive months. And so, they're applying, we're interviewing, and we're accepting residents to be able to move into their one-bedroom tiny home. It's brand new, it's modern, it's fresh, it's clean. It's a game changer, from coming off of the streets into this beautiful small home. If you can imagine, we just got through with our hot summer days. Some of those were triple digits. Now we're moving into fall and soon winter. And around here the last couple of years, it's always gotten down to almost zero.
I'm a Marine veteran. I served 90 to 95 back during, the Gulf War era. 2 deployments overseas on a ship, and then I was in Okinawa for like 6 months on a deployment, Westpat. And I moved to Tulsa in 2014, I think. I've been here 10 years. My daughter's 10 now, so I have a daughter and a son. My son's in St. Louis. He's 17, and my daughter's 10. But I got divorced and kind of lost my path a little bit financially and all that. I hear that happens a lot. So this is kind of a way for me to get started back again, get on my feet, kind of get going. I get my VA disability, so that's a good thing. Got income. Now a roof over my head will just kind of make life full circle.
Well, with my housing situation and being in and out of my truck and dealing with diabetes, dealing with depression, I was, casually optimistic at that time when they told me, okay, in several months, this is all going to come here, and you could be here. So I just held on to their shirt tail and let the time pass, and here we are. Shaving, hygiene, all that's a major challenge when you don't have a sink. So it was tricky, but doable. When I went through the divorce, through the depression, and I had suicidal thoughts for a while. And thankfully to Family and Children's and reading, suicide is a long-term solution for a short-term problem. So, I couldn't fathom my son finding out. Kept me alive.
Yeah, so there's so many opportunities and different ways to help out. Obviously, when you think about giving, it's you go right into your generosity and maybe it's a tithe or just a donation from your heart, but also time. Time is our most valuable commodity, and so being available and giving time. We're always looking for volunteers, whether it's in the office or physical labor on our property. But that time component, the volunteer, that's what's really going to spearhead Eden Village when we get our residents, and it's going to be vital.
The PTSD and the trauma, you learn bad habits, so you have to break those habits. And sometimes bringing outside people in to help you get out of your house or to eat your food, to see a smile, for me to see you happy from something that I did, gives me self-confidence, gives me motivation, makes me feel good about myself, gives me stability, then it gives me something to look forward to. Because I know the guys are, the church guys are going to come by. Harvard's coming by next week, my family that bought my house. Having you guys there is the part that keeps me grounded, keep me going every day. That part of having a family, knowing that somebody's got your back, knowing that you don't really need for anything either. So you can focus on, like I say, other things. I can focus on blessing other people now. I can go around cooking food and maybe even donating or giving it to the homeless or something now because I'm no longer in that. I've moved on, I've graduated to a better thing. So that's what it does for me. Like I said, I was one of those people saying, I don't see the church out, but the church is out here doing it and doing this one thing for us, man. It's amazing.
No, I appreciate talking to you today, and I hope anyone that hears what I have to say, come on out here, and I'd be happy to meet them and share what I've learned. And it's not a soap opera, it's real.
Look what God can do. Look what God can do. How do you feel about that? I remember when Brad Johnson, the founder of Eden Village, was sitting in my office long before this dream became a reality, and him telling me about his dream and vision for Eden Village. I honestly was excited about it, but had a hard time imagining that it would ever be true. Brad Johnson formed in 1999 Lawn America and built a successful, thriving business here in Tulsa with more than 16,000 customers and 60 employees. Brad, during that time period, went on a walk all the way through Appalachia. The Appalachian Trail, walked 2,000 miles straight through, carrying just a backpack on his back. And Brad said that made an impression on him what it was like to live outdoors with only what you could carry on his back. During the pandemic, he began to wonder and have a burden on his heart for those who were living on the streets and began to explore what might be possible. He then learned about a concept in Missouri called Eden Village. Brad and Becky, his wife at that time, decided to retire and to sell their business. But unfortunately, for Brad and Becky, they failed terribly at retirement. Did you catch that? They failed terribly. And instead, God put on their heart a vision to begin Eden Village. Brad's father, Roy Johnson, was a member of our congregation, sat third row every Sunday at the 11 o'clock service. I remember a few years ago, 3 years ago, he turned 100 years old. We brought him to church in a limousine. We gave him a birthday cake. We put 100 candles on it. We gave him a leaf blower. He blew it out. And I remember watching him dance. He was so happy that day. Sadly, 2 months later, I was standing at the graveside of this decorated World War II veteran, saying goodbye to him as we heard taps play to honor this man's life. Rob Johnson left the church in his will $25,000. We then took that $25,000 and our church more than matched it, and we were able to be one of the first two churches in our community, the first two groups in this community to get on board with Eden Village, and we were able to purchase the first 2 homes. Remember, it sat on our lot for 6 months. For 6 months, it sat on the lot. And now look. And did you see the people that were walking around as these new residents were moving in and the dream was becoming a reality? We saw the members of our congregation who were there to provide all 9 residents with housewarming kits, dishes, plates, silverware, paper towels, paper products, sheets, to make their new home truly a home. And you see, a home is only a shelter without friends. And so this project is just beginning. We will continue to support Eden Village in the future, but the real work begins as we begin to develop relationships and continue to support with our friendship and our work and our support of the new residents who are there. It's amazing. You know, the reality is when it comes to problems in our community, friends, it's not a problem of resources. It's primarily a lack of imagination. Can I say that one more time? It's not a problem of resources. It's almost always a lack of imagination. And what I've learned from witnessing this project is that we should never, ever underestimate what God can do when someone says yes to God. There was a student, she's an OSU nursing student, and one afternoon she was leaving class and she was going downtown to meet some friends for some dinner and some lunch and have some fun with her friends. She's carrying her backpack on her back. And she's walking down the street and she notices someone lying crumpled up against the building. You know, you've been downtown. This individual was in some sort of pain. And like you, she did what I do, and what we do is sometimes most of the time, we just walk on by for all kinds of reasons. But she just kept hearing his cry in her mind, and she could hear him, and against her better instinct, she turned around and she walked back to the man who was lying against the building, and she looked at him closely, and honestly, he was delirious, but he was wounded. Scrapes and cuts, looked like he had been beaten and bruised. So she knelt down beside him and she looked into his eyes. She took off her backpack. She took out a bottle of water. She had some Kleenex in there, and she used the Kleenex in the water to clean some of the wounds on his hands and on his face. She gave him the bottle of water and some peanut butter crackers. I think there were like 5 left, and gave it to him. As she was caring for this man, another man walked by and said, loud enough for her to hear, "I wouldn't do that for $1 million. To which she replied, "Neither would I." The reality is a lot of things we wouldn't do for $1 million. But God calls us to operate in a different standard. To be able to help others without seeking any kind of reward or recognition or what it might cost us. And we've been talking about the Beatitudes, right? All through the end of the summer. And the reality is that if we want to be a people of the Beatitudes, we just can't love the people that are going to love us back. And Jesus, throughout the Gospels, particularly in the Gospel of Mark, over and over again, says that true greatness is not found in recognition, the accumulation of wealth. It's not found in gaining fame for ourselves or winning the respect of others, but that true greatness comes in serving others, underneath others. It's not a path to greatness, it's a path of downward mobility by the one that Paul writes and said that even though he did not consider equality with God as something, he did not consider equality with God something to be grasped or exploited, but that he humbled himself and became a servant to the least of these. And that's why Jesus says many times, he says it over and over again in the Gospels, if you want to get life, when you try to hold on to it, you're going to lose it. But if you let it go, you'll find it. And so we see in this story, this gospel story, listen to it, because Jesus will mess you up. Not the Jesus in stained glass, not the Jesus in a book, but the real Jesus that's at work in the world, still overturning the tables of the money changers, will wreck us. Because James and John, it was a critical moment in the ministry of Jesus. They were on their way to Jerusalem, and he had just told them that he was going to suffer and die for the third time. And just as they're approaching Jerusalem, James and John did what we all do. They called shotgun. And you know what shotgun is? It's when you first see the vehicle and you yell shotgun, what that means is you get to ride in the front seat. And so they said, Jesus, we want you to do a favor for us. When you get to Jerusalem, we want to be at your right and left. You know what they were doing? They were saying, they were getting close to him because they were looking for a prime spot in his cabinet. Nothing intended. That's not a political comment. They're looking for a primo spot next to Jesus. And what they were talking about there was a theology of glory. A theology of glory says that you get close to God for what God can do for you. A theology of glory is that when Jesus comes into Jerusalem, he's going to achieve and seize glory and become the king with worldly power. But every time in the Gospels when Jesus talks about a theology of glory, he talks about a theology of the cross. And Jesus said, you don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink? To be baptized with the baptism which I am baptized? And they said, yeah, we're able. And he says, you don't even know what you're asking. And at that moment, of course, the other disciples, they're furious. They can't believe what they've heard, this disconnect. And they are indignant. And it's at that moment that Jesus says it again. We're not like the rest of the world. We're going to use our power over others. We're going to come up underneath others and become a servant. Because I myself, he said, the Son of Man, did not come to be served, but to serve and to give my life as a ransom for the many. You see, Jesus is not a technique for getting what you want. Jesus is God's way of getting what God wants from us. Sometimes when you drive around town, and don't you like to look at church signs? Every now and then a church sign will say something like this: looking for peace? Jesus is the answer. Anxious and afraid? Jesus is the answer. Come celebrate with us. I've never seen a church sign that says, come die with us, we have a cross for you. It's not a good selling. You know, I was taught that if you want to grow a church, you got to preach to people's felt needs. But I don't think Mark, the gospel writer, got the memo. He didn't attend a church growth strategy meeting because there's very little in that book about people's, us appealing to people's pet needs. In fact, the more Jesus preached, the smaller the crowds got until he was the only one left. Will Willimon, great storyteller, retired United Methodist bishop, former dean of Duke Chapel. Will Willimon, when he was a dean at Duke Chapel, once was speaking to a group of students, and he was lamenting over the few number of students that actually came to worship on a Sunday morning at the chapel. He said, I don't understand why they don't come. And he said that one of the students said to him, well, Dean, don't you know that we have the smartest students in the country? A little bit arrogant, perhaps. He said, but they're smart enough to know if they get close to Jesus, their life's going to get more difficult. So you should be glad that with the few that are actually showing up. Because the truth is, when it comes to Jesus, there is no easy button. There is nothing easy at all about Jesus. and when you give your life to Jesus, it's not going to get easier. It may get better, but it'll certainly be more difficult. I mean, think about it. It's not easy following Jesus in a climate that equates success with accumulation. Not easy following Jesus in a climate that is bent toward revenge and resentment when Jesus calls us to forgive our enemies and to love our enemies. It's not easy following Jesus when He wants us to uphold truth and integrity in a culture that rewards dishonesty. It's not easy following Jesus in a culture that wants to demonize the poor and the marginalized when Jesus says to walk with the lowly. You know what? Can I just say it? Because I'm going to anyway. You know, all those conversations that you've been having about politics the last few weeks, and you're with a group of people, and when one friend walks away, they go, I can't believe he voted for that person. And you're having these conversations and you're talking about people behind their backs because you just can't believe that your friend who's a Christian would actually do this or do that. It's not easy being a good person in that moment who says, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to love people and I'm not going to look at them by the way that they voted. I'm going to look at them and love them for who they are and try to understand them before I judge them. It's not easy being a follower of Jesus in a world where people want us to divide and hate one another on the basis of politics, when we are called to love one another. Everything good that's happened in my life, everything good, is because when I was 15 years old, I said, I want you to be my Lord and Savior, and I will follow you. But also, some of the most difficult things that have ever happened to me has been because I was in a situation where I had to follow Jesus and it put me in a bad situation. And the truth is also that many of the bad things that have happened to me in my life is because I didn't follow Jesus, instead decided to do what I thought was the best thing to do. I bet that happened to nobody else in this room, right? And the funny thing about this story is that you read it, it happens over and over again in Mark. There's just this huge confusion. The disciples are close to him. They just don't get him. They don't understand him. 3 times he says, I'm going to suffer and die. And Peter goes, no way, Jesus, that's not the plan. It's not a strategic plan. And then the second time, he says, I'm going to suffer and die. And as soon as it happens, the disciples having an argument. Well, I'm better than you. I'm a better minister than Kevin. Kevin's better than Whitney. They're arguing among themselves. And he can't believe it. And then a third time, James and John call shotgun. All the way down to the Last Supper, he looks at them and he says, if you want to be great, you got to be a servant. And then he gets up and washes Peter's feet. And he says, don't wash my feet. And Jesus says, I'm here to wash your feet. You wash each other. They still don't get it. And by this, they have to understand by now. But who was it that carried a sword into the garden? Peter. And ever since Jesus said we're called to be servants, the church of Jesus Christ has been trying over and over again to make him into our earthly king that represents our politics, our prejudice, our fear, and our hate, because we want him to look like us. Okay. Am I still working here? Okay. 3 shifts we have to make as a church. This is where it gets hard. As a church, we got to shift from just saluting our beliefs about Jesus to actually following him. It's really say, I salute you, Savior Jesus. I believe in you. He's not looking for believers, he's looking for followers. He's not looking for fans, he's looking for followers. The second thing is, there's nothing wrong with the Rotary Club. Doug's in the Rotary Club. Nothing wrong with it. But the Rotary Club talks about volunteering. It's a good thing. But the church is not a place where we go to volunteer. And we got to make a shift from being volunteers, where it's something, it's episodic. We do this, we're helping, we're doing that. Jesus isn't looking for volunteers. He's looking for you and me to accept a call to ministry. When I was ordained when I was baptized. Everyone that says, I believe in you, Jesus, you are ordained to the ministry of Jesus Christ. And we have to see that it's not volunteering. It's a way of life. It's how we're called to live. And every place where you live in this world is where you are called to serve. And the final one is the hardest. Because Jesus says that wealthy people have a hard time getting into the kingdom of God because they're wealthy. And you know why? Because they think they're better than other people. We won't say it, but we look at people differently who have less. And you've heard me say it before. We think we have more because we're blessed. Bad thing to say, right? You've heard me say this over and over again. You're not wealthy because you're blessed. You're wealthy because you're more fortunate. You were born in the right place. You had opportunities other people didn't have. But because we think that way, we look at people, instead of looking at them as people, we see them as objects of charity. And so we got to make a shift of seeing not those men that moved into Eden Village as objects of charity, but people like you and me that we are walking with together to do life with. Jesus is so challenging. We'll never get there. We're all in progress. We're all forming. But he has called us at this time and this place in our world to be his people. And I'm so encouraged. I'm so encouraged by you. The way that you do serve, the way that you do care, the way that you do love. And my prayer is that we will be a church that will begin to look at people as people rather than objects of our charity, and that we will get with people that we are to live under and not above. And we won't call shotgun.